It's not amplified here.
Hey, y'all. If this microphone doesn't make me seem louder, it's because it's only for the Zoom. Yeah. Hey, my name's Nicholas Gromfox. I am on the Windom Park Citizens in Action board, and I'm going to be the MC tonight. Good to see you all here. Thanks so much for coming. This is like a great turnout. For those of you online, we've got a very full room here. And actually, I think we don't have enough chairs. There are 2 chairs here in front if anyone wants to come. Also, some chairs back there in that corner. One over here. So yeah, let's get started. We got a lot to cover tonight. So quick overview about WPCIA. We are the neighborhood organization for Windom Park. We work to create a well-connected and livable neighborhood by creating an open process for residents to be involved in the affairs of the community. Our goals are in line with the 2040 plan to eliminate disparities in livability, create safe and connected people, develop complete neighborhoods, and pursue a healthy environment. So that's why we're here. Next slide, please. Oh, we also made that mural with the Blue Jay on it on the park building. Here is our agenda meeting agenda tonight. We got some updates on our programs that we run. We'll just kind of cycle through those real quick so that you know what you can get from us. Then we have a Ward 1 update with Council President Elliot Payne, who joins us tonight. Then we're going to talk about this abandoned nursing home that you can see behind me. You know, what are you thinking? We have regulatory services here tonight to talk through it. And we have an activity outside that some of you already started doing in regards to how we might respond. And then finally, we want to talk about the Johnson Street Boulevard plantings. So when Johnson Street was reconstructed, a bunch of boulevards were installed. They are now kind of overgrown and a nuisance. And there's a conversation happening about what to do about it. Cool. Well, let's get into it. Next slide, please. First, some of you might be here because we have a new newsletter. So yeah, we're seeking feedback on this new format. We used to send out colorful postcards. Now we're sending out this thing that kind of unfolds into a full newsletter. This was our first ever stab at that. We made some mistakes, including the date of this meeting. But we want to get better and better. So please tell us if you have any ideas about what should be in there instead of what's in there or in addition to what's in there. We would also love to feature your news and your events because we really want to just use this newsletter to connect the neighborhood. So feel free. If anyone has any feedback right now, I'd love to hear it. Raise your hand. It got your attention. That's great to hear. Oh yeah, so better contact information in there and then ask for suggestions. Great idea. I'm just repeating that so that Zoom can hear you. If I'm repeating you, it's because Zoom can't hear you. Any other thoughts on the newsletter? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, it used to be like that. Oh, so this is the return of the newsletter. I didn't even know that. Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that we do as an organization is we offer financial assistance programs to neighbors. I'll just quickly burn through these. We offer $200 home security rebates. You can spend that on cameras, floodlights, all kinds of different security things. We have a pretty liberal interpretation of the word security. So feel free to ask us and you might get a yes. We also have low interest home loans that you can use to tackle like DIY projects around the house or even hire contractors with that money. Low interest rates that we offer are very competitive nowadays compared to bank interest rates. We also offer free home energy squad audits for people to come out and check out how well insulated your house is and things you can do to save some money on your energy bills. And then finally, we also have low interest commercial loans for businesses in the neighborhood. So those are really awesome too. Low interest compared to the bank. Got a question in the back? Yeah. Incorrect. If you already bought a security camera, send us the receipt and we can get you a $200 rebate. Additionally, that's every year. So if you buy something this year and then next year and the year after, we can get you 3 rebates. And I think like a screenshot of your Amazon history would be sufficient. You know, it doesn't need to be a paper receipt. All right, let's go to the next slide. There's more assistance programs. We also have emergency loans, which are more like quick cash if you're in need. We also offered a national night out rebate for the first time this year to try to stimulate block parties and have more neighbors hanging out, having fun. So $150 towards approved expenses, pretty much anything other than alcohol and other intoxicants. And finally, we have a rain barrel rebate, not a rain garden rebate. So pretend that said barrel. And this is for you to capture rainwater at your home. And we will, again, this is yearly. So you could install a rain barrel every year for the next 8 years, and we could get you $125 each time. Yep. Absolutely. The goal here is to reduce the amount of stormwater that's going down into the sewers during peak events. So if there's a big thunderstorm, we're trying to kind of slow down the water as it's on its way to the river. And so this rain barrel that would be in your yard would help us do that. Oh, I see. Okay, so an audience member has told us that if you install rain gardens and rain barrels, you can get a discount on your stormwater fee from the city. Absolutely. Thanks for that. All right, next slide, please. All right, next I want to talk about the construction happening just west of the quarry at Johnson Street and 35W. All work is set to be complete by Thanksgiving. This is not an aerial photograph of what it will look like, but if you want to know what it will look like, I think there's going to be a lot of resurfacing, maybe new pedestrian improved experience, maybe some new boulevards, and northbound will be done first week of October. Southbound will be closed. So those of you who are still taking the southbound, watch out for that. A temporary signal will be used for much of the winter, and work will continue on the signal so that it'll be done in early spring. So we're talking about like the traffic light will be done by early spring. And then by the end of May 2025, it should be cleaned up and ready to go, according to this slide. All right, let's go to the next slide. We have our final movie in the park that we have planned. We also have some ideas of maybe expanding into the winter a bit more, but this Friday will feature the film Encanto, which is a great one. Starts at 7:45, and there will be s'mores bar. So come check it out. There will be bonfires and music. So that's up at the pavilion at the northwest corner of the park. By pavilion, I mean like kind of that white skeletal thing. Doesn't actually keep the rain off of you. Pergola. It's a pergola. Okay, let's move on. And I'll pass it over to Council President Elliot Payne. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone online. Hello, everybody in the room. Elliot Payne, he, him. I represent Ward 1 on City Council, which is this area, but I'm also the council president. I'm also the chair of the audit committee, and I'm also a member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So I just came from the Board of Estimate and Taxation today. So a big component of my update today is that we're in budget season. And so just to recap, budgeting is actually kind of like an ongoing all-year affair, but there's some really key milestones. Number one is the mayor's recommended budget. He released that in August. Big milestone two was today, just about an hour ago, is setting the max levy. So the mayor recommends a max levy in his budget, but it's the Board of Estimate and Taxation that adopts that levy. And this year, the park board was requesting additional money that the mayor had not included in his recommended budget. They were requesting $2.5 million. And if you all recall, there was a pretty significant labor action that happened this summer. The park workers went on strike. And, you know, as we were looking at the budget, as the park board was looking at the budget, they saw that they wanted to make sure that their budget could accommodate the salary adjustments that happened as a result of the negotiated agreement. I supported the workers in their strike. City Council passed a resolution in support of those workers. And I think it's just really important that we look out for our workforce, especially, I mean, across the city. We have a few city staff here. The city's been through a lot in the last 4 years, and inflation is happening. Everybody is got, you know, really tight budgets. So it's going to be a very hard budget year this year. I'm going to say that out front. So already the mayor's recommended budget was fairly high. The action that we took today, we actually didn't meet the park board's request for the full $2.5 billion, but they did line item out the amount of money for workers and the amount of money for expanding free and reduced access to youth programming. I personally felt that those were really important priorities for the city. And so we did actually, it was about a half of what the park board was asking for, actually a little bit more than half. They were asking for about 2.5 million. And this is literally just an hour ago. We ended up doing a compromise 1 million. That was a motion I brought forward because I thought that I'm very sensitive about the levy and the impact on not just homeowners, but everybody who lives in Minneapolis is impacted by the levy. And so that was my role as a Board of Estimate and Taxation member, but my role on City Council, particularly as the president of City Council, is really working with all the members to say, how can we be disciplined in how we're approaching this budget? Everybody is going through struggles. I think that the city needs to make really hard choices about that. So it's really important to know that when we set the max levy, that isn't the levy. The levy is defined when the city adopts the final budget. And we are in the kind of peak budget amendment process. Oftentimes those budget amendments are about, you know, hey, we need more building inspectors, maybe more so than health inspectors, because the restaurant scene is maybe stable and there's not a lot of new restaurants opening, but we have maybe some, you know, bigger challenges around property. So somebody might make a budget amendment to take from the health inspectors and staff up our housing inspectors as an example. But also in that process, we can cut. And so one of the things that we're all doing on City Council is going through every single department and trying to identify, are there harder choices that we could make to get that overall levy number down? So that's a very intense process, as you can imagine, because there are 13 members who all want to fight for their ward, resources for their ward. And so there's a little bit of a competitiveness to it, right? Because the money is limited, but if we can shepherd that process, I think we can get to a place where we're recognizing the priorities for our city while being fiscally responsible. So that's kind of like the big thing that's happening right now. But one thing I want to talk about that's happening tomorrow morning for our full council meeting is there's going to be a number of actions that we're taking around housing. And our ward has actually been fairly, every ward is impacted by the housing crisis in various ways. Some of the wards, especially on the south side, have significant challenges with encampments. We have had significant challenges with encampments. The biggest one that you all remember is the one at the quarry. That was cleared, I want to say, at the end of 2022 or 3, in any case. But there are still some challenges with folks living outdoors in our ward. And there's this spectrum across the housing crisis, right? There are folks that are who own their home, but they're living on a fixed income. The tax levy is an important component for that part of our housing, right? There are folks that are working check to check and rent keeps on going up, or their groceries keep on going up and they're having a hard time making ends meet. That's a whole nother component. You have at the hardest level of challenge is when you have these intersectional problems of somebody who might be struggling with substance use disorder, somebody who might have some mental health challenges, somebody who just doesn't have family in town that can help them in times of need, and they end up outdoors. And one of the big challenges is that we have very limited shelter capacity in the city. And even when we do have shelter available, sometimes it doesn't meet the needs of folks. So we have shelter that is very targeted for people who are managing HIV and AIDS. We have shelter for people that are in a family and they have young ones. We've actually had a huge influx of new arrivals from places like Ecuador, and the county has a policy that we do our best to try to provide shelter for families especially. And so there's a lot of pressure on our capacity for that. And it doesn't help when one of those shelters has to shut down. And so if you've read the news, there's a shelter downtown ran by Agate that they're just running into a fiscal cliff like a lot of our homeless service providers are going to run into. And they're going to have to shut that building down because it has so many capital needs. It needs a lot of renovation and modernizing. It just wasn't a safe and dignified place for people. And so council is stepping in to take an action to try to provide some gap funding and a match so that other funders, whether it's the county to the state or even private philanthropy, can help save that building, because the alternative would be they shut down in October, which is still going to happen because they need 6 to 12 months worth of renovation to bring it back online. But if they were to shut down in October, they were likely going to have to sell the building because they still have some pretty significant budget challenges within their organization. And so we're trying to step in, save that shelter capacity, at least for the long term, for the more sustainable term. That's on like the most immediate end of things that we're trying to do. But we're also doing an ordinance around reporting so that we can understand what is the true cost of evicting an encampment. When you evict an encampment, especially if you don't have shelter capacity for the people who are living outside, there's not a place for them to go. So unless we're talking about loading people up on buses and shipping them to some part of the country, we have to figure out how to house people if we're going to address homelessness. And we have to know what the true cost of evicting people is so that we can identify what opportunities there might be to have a different approach. So that's an ordinance that's coming before us tomorrow. And then there is we're extending the pre-eviction notice. So if you are having a hard time coming up with rent for a month, there's actually a lot of programs that are available for supporting renters. So the county has set aside $5 million to help with rental assistance in those moments when people are falling short. But as you can imagine, it's a fairly bureaucratic process to make sure that you qualify, and we have to vet your need, and it can take, it can take a while to work through that process. We already had a 14-day pre-eviction notice on the books. The state recently followed that, with our Democratic trifecta. They've actually passed a lot of really great policy that started in Minneapolis, and now they're extending it statewide. We want to stay ahead of that curve. One of the unique challenges of Minneapolis and Hennepin County is we're just the most populous county in the entire state of Minnesota. So when you're going to seek renters assistance in Hennepin County, there's potentially thousands of people ahead of you in line. And so it can just take time to get through that backlog. This 30 days will allow people to make it through that backlog, get their rent paid, make the landlords whole, and it will prevent that person from being on the street. So we're trying to move across that spectrum. People who are currently living on the street, let's make sure that we're preserving shelter space. People who are on the cusp of getting evicted, let's give them every opportunity that we possibly can to keep them in their home so they don't end up putting additional pressure on our limited shelter capacity. And then we also need to continue building new housing so that we're alleviating some of those kind of market pressures that are keeping rents up. That's why you see things like that new triplex that went up across the street from the park. That was part of the 2040 plan to try to get more housing stock available in the city so that from a market-based perspective, we have more supply, which should therefore put some downward price pressure on the demand side. So those are kind of some of the housing actions that we're doing that are like really immediate in this moment. And then I would just say, I just really, really, really appreciate the role that neighborhood organizations have in our community. We get like I, especially as president, I have to have this view of the entire city and policies that impact the entire city and look at all these big picture things like police reform, climate action, the housing crisis. These are big challenges. And it's also important to recognize that we have this abandoned building in our community, that we have this overgrown boulevard on the street, and these very hyper local issues that like this organization has helped facilitate real focus and energy around getting staff to be able to come and speak to some of the things that we're working on as a city. being able to, you know, learn about maybe some programs that the city already has available that you may just not know about yet. And the neighborhood association can be really good at helping to bring that awareness and accessibility to city government. So those are my main updates. We'll be able to go in depth on some of the more urgent local issues covered in the agenda. And I'm happy to pass it on and get into that part of the conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Council President Elliott Payne. Thomas, yes. Yeah, anyone on Zoom have a question that you want to field? Actually, anyone in the room have a question that you want to field? And we will have plenty of discussion coming up. So if you have a specific question about the nursing home or otherwise, we'll have.
Yeah, what is the current status of the 2040 plan? I know it's been lawsuit delayed and. all
That's
that
a good
stuff.
question. The history of the 2040 plan is, God, how far back do I even want to go? The most important thing that it's the base of the question about what's going on with the 2040 plan is that it had passed city council and it was adopted, but it got caught up in a lawsuit. So there was basically a lawsuit that was challenging the comprehensive plan on environmental grounds. So we have laws on the books that say, if you're going to build a factory in a community, you need to do an environmental analysis to make sure that that factory is not going to harm the community. That state law was the basis for this lawsuit. And the premise of the lawsuit was, you know, by upzoning all of the single family home plots to a triplex, again, like the apartment or the triplex across from the park over here, in theory, you could Thanos snap your fingers and all of a sudden triple the population of the city. And then that triple population is going to have these environmental impacts like increased traffic or other harms of that nature. And that was the basis of the lawsuit. And it was my opinion that that was kind of a misapplication of that state law. The state law is really designed around individual projects. It's not designed around comprehensive plans because the 2040 plan was passed and enacted, and it was before the courts had stopped it from being implemented. It was available for building new housing for at least a year, maybe a couple of years. I don't remember the specific time because it was kind of in the courts, out of the courts, in the courts for a while. But it actually takes a long time for that kind of plan to translate into new projects. And so it's not the case that you can Thanos snap your fingers and all of a sudden have triplexes on every single family plot in the city. That's just not a very feasible reality. But it was hung up in the courts. It got, basically we had to pause the implementation of the 2040 plan and revert back to the 2030 plan. We have to do a 10-year comprehensive plan. Well, it's actually a 20-year plan every 10 years by Met Council, and state statute says the city has to do that. So we had to revert back to the previous plan while it was getting resolved in the courts. It actually ended up at the state legislature where they were looking at that environmental evaluation law. I think it's called MIRA, Minnesota Environmental Review Act, something like that. And basically the state legislature put in an exemption for comprehensive plans. So that the law is more clear that this is intended to evaluate individual projects, not kind of theoretical comprehensive plans. And so it got finalized in the last legislative session. The 2040 plan it's now settled and basically fully implemented. Does the city have a similar document to Hennepin County around sustainable landscape guidelines for successful plantings? I believe we do. I would have to go do a little research because I know it's touched on in our street design guide, which is a fairly comprehensive design guide that also includes stormwater management and boulevard plantings as an example for managing stormwater. I don't know if we have a separate document specifically on this topic, but that's something I can definitely go research. Yeah, and Public Works is also, we have our inspection services are here and we have Public Works here for our 2 agenda items. The question is about bike lanes. Why is the city building bike lanes when, at least when you're not seeing them being used? And it feels expensive when you could take just a side street versus a bike lane on a main arterial. Did I capture that question correctly? There's a few perspectives on this. I think that first one is it's not an incrementally more expensive investment by the city. So when the city is going to do a reconstruction on something like Johnson Street, which has a mixed use bike lane as part of the reconstruction, the cost of tearing up concrete and repouring concrete is the same cost, whether you're putting the curbs back where they were or moving the curbs. Once you bust up the curb and have to repour them, it's the same cost. So there's not a particularly higher cost to building bike lanes relative to car lanes when you're already in the process of doing a reconstruction. So that's on the cost side. Why put a bike lane on the main arterial when you could just use a side street? So this is a question I had too. I'm a daily bike commuter year round. And I've been doing it for long enough that I predate a lot of the bike lanes that have been installed, and I've got my routes figured out, right? I have my routes figured out where I try to avoid cars. I take side streets. I live up on 29th and Johnson. I go over to Lincoln and come down Lincoln. I actually don't use the Johnson Street lane. Sorry. I kind of I wiggle my way around until I get to where I need to go. And I've just been doing it long enough that I have my routes picked out. These bike lanes are not designed for me, right? These are not designed for very experienced bikers. And like, I have friends that have been biking for 40 years and they used to be like professional racers. And when I go out riding with them, they like refuse to use bike lanes. They're just more comfortable in the street because that's just how they bike. And there's kind of a machismo-ness about it too. There's a taking my space-ness of it too. The bike lanes are not for those experienced bikers who are proud and confident to be biking. The bike lanes are for people who don't bike, and they're to encourage people to start biking. And one of the things that's important about it is if you don't know that the bike lane is there, you're not going to plan a trip by bike. And I think you're correct. I don't see a lot of people using Johnson Street. I myself don't use Johnson Street. I'm actually a little bit embarrassed about it because I should be the biggest advocate for that. But one of the challenges is that if you don't have a connected network, it's a huge impediment. And so one of the reasons I don't end up using Johnson Street is that I don't have an easy way to connect to Johnson Street from my house. So I would, if I wanted to connect to Johnson Street, I'd either take Lincoln and then have to come over up the hill a little bit, or I'd take Hayes and have to do a weird hop over the thing right here and cut over and be in traffic. So having a more complete connected bike lane network is going to be one of the things that gets people out of their car and onto a bike. And people are not going to envision themselves taking that bike route unless they see that lane. And so unlike Johnson Street on 29th, we just resurfaced and we put in kind of like a much lighter investment. It was originally supposed to be a full reconstruction and it ended up being a mill and overlay instead. They found that the underlying ground was structurally sound enough to just do resurfacing. In that resurfacing, we did some striping and some bollards, the little plastic things that go up, and we created a bike lane. I have never seen that many people bike on 29th in my 20 years living on 29th. So it's about encouraging new people who are not comfortable and confident biking in traffic to see that as a real choice for them. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to happen overnight. Although in the case of 29th Avenue, it literally did happen overnight. Like literally the day that the bollards went in, I saw a group of students riding down 29th, and I'd never seen them ride down 29th before. It's just, it's one of these bigger picture, 20 years from now, what does our city look like? And this is one of the challenges with the 2040 plan, going back to that question. If you increase density and you take away parking minimums and you have that many more people living in the city, it's just not going to be feasible for every single person to own a car and store that car somewhere in the public right away. It's just not going to like, even if we just said abolish all bike lanes today, the rate of growth in this city is happening to the extent that it's not going to be feasible for everybody to be able to store their private vehicle in the public right away. And so how do we actually make the city be something that you can live, work, and play in without requiring that you have a car? And one of the ways to do that is expanding our public transportation network. And I think it does need to be about a better public transportation network. And it's expanding access to things that make people feel safe biking. That was a long answer.
29th one makes like no sense. So like I guess I've seen like different systems go in, and it's like I would prefer to see on 29th like they've done that Monroe Street plan, like that work. But I think when we do inconsistent systems all over the place, like that's kind of a confusing system.
The question or comment was that the treatment that Monroe got for bike facility, which is called a advisory lane, so it has dotted lines on either side, feels better than the treatment on 29th. And I will be the first to tell you that the treatment on 29th is not the ideal treatment, because it basically grew out of a community engagement process where there was actually a lot of anger and frustration at the downgrade from a reconstruction to this mill and overlay. And one of the biggest problems that the community wanted to solve was the truck traffic on 29th Avenue. So it was actually that bike lane was less about the bikes and more about the trucks. How do we narrow the street and slow traffic down so that the tractor trailers don't drive down it? Because we can't technically ban it because it's a state funded road. So that's how we arrived at that bike lane treatment. So the bike lane is just kind of like a bonus for trying to keep the trucks off. This community group that just kind of organically formed around 29th Avenue, they went out and bought Raspberry Pis and identified this software that you can mount a sensor in your window, and they're doing like guerrilla traffic studies where it's using computer vision to identify truck, car, pedestrian, and they've actually got a public dashboard. If I find it, I'll send it to you. Did you want to move on with your agenda? All right. I'm getting Beckon to move on with the agenda, so I'm going to hand it back to Nick. What are the license fees for bicycles? There isn't a license fee for bicycles. You know, the license fee for cars, as an example, is really what it's trying to accommodate is the wear and tear on the roads. There's a cost to taxpayers for cars to beat up our roads. And so the purpose of the license fees is to try to recognize that. And yeah, if we were to actually, we subsidize the cost of the roads, right? That's what your tax dollars go to.
Then you do online training.
Mm-hmm.
Riding your bicycle.
You can, that's legal, but in the state of Minnesota. But yeah, if we were to actually put the cost of road construction and repair onto the individual person via a license fee, there would be pitchforks because it would be very expensive to maintain the roads out of private dollars. All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Sure you'll get back. All right, y'all, we're going to move on to our discussion about the nursing home. So Thomas, can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, so we are, I think many of you are here tonight to discuss this pretty hot topic. There's an abandoned nursing home, if you don't know about it, right on the southeast corner of the park. It used to be called Bethany Care Center. Now it's called Twin Cities Gardens. It was at one point called Heritage. It's got a couple different names. If we move to the next slide, you know, the history is built in 1960, I think added on to significantly in the 70s. It was kind of a touchstone here in the Windom Park neighborhood. A lot of people worked there. A lot of people lived there. It was well managed. Then recent history, things have gone pretty precipitously downhill. It was sold in 2014. Reports of abuse predate COVID, but things really kind of hit large obstacles during COVID, let's say. There were a lot of unpaid taxes, unpaid utility bills, poor maintenance. In 2021, in the midst of kind of height of COVID, the state of Minnesota essentially took over the business. Now, there are nightmarish stories about what was happening in the building at that time, and I don't want to get into those, but it was an almost unprecedented act for the state to take over a nursing home like that. So it has ever since sat vacant. So essentially the state took it over, replaced the operator with a new operator, and then very quickly tried to get everyone into a different home. And then once everyone was rehoused, the building has been, man, the building's been vacant ever since. This summer, things have really taken a turn for the worse. And we're talking about graffiti, broken windows, toilets thrown off of balconies, all kinds of things like that. We actually have the city regulatory services here with us today who can discuss the condition of the building and some of the things that have been happening. Hot news is that it's condemned by the city. So that's kind of new this summer. And then also very new news, can you go to the next slide, Thomas, is that the building is for sale by auction in 5 days. So if you're seeing new activity here at the building, that's because the owners are kind of quickly moving to, I think, prepare for a sale. So a lot is happening in the neighborhood around this. The building will likely not remain a nursing home and could change use through the process of being sold. Some neighbors here in the neighborhood want local control. So, you know, very likely you're going to have someone who has a lot of money from out of state buy this building and operate it, develop it. Some neighbors want local control. WPCIA, that's this organization, is considering bidding, but the truth is we don't have a ton of money, right? So if we were to make a bid, it would probably be a low bid, and we would only really be able to compete with low bids. And, you know, today we also lack the capacity to rehabilitate the building, to operate the building, to do it. Really, the thing we do is we put on these meetings and we put on movies in the park, and we do those loans. We're really good at that. If it comes to, you know, rehabbing an abandoned nursing home, I think it would be a sweet haunted house for this Halloween though. So yeah, I at the same time want to say, I think we could build the capacity, right? Just because our organization doesn't have the capacity to rehabilitate and manage a building like this doesn't mean we couldn't do it. And this is just one local vehicle that we could use. We could also form a local corporation. There's a Northeast Investment Co-op. There are a number of different ways that we as a neighborhood could place a bid on this building and try to take it over. But whoever does it is going to need experts, and we lack the capacity, we lack the experts. There's just one other thing I want to say. The auction's happening on September 23rd through September 25th. There's a possibility that the auction will fail. What that might look like is that they don't meet the threshold for the building being ready to sell, or that nobody bids the minimum selling price. So this is an auction under reserve, which means there's a reserve price on the building hidden from us as the bidders. And if they say, oh, we want at least 3 million and nobody bids 3 million, then we're going to kind of, the cycle will repeat itself. Okay. So there are some possible outcomes. Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to you two. So why don't you come up here and introduce yourself? This is Minneapolis Regulatory Services, inspectors of the building. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name is Brian Starry. I am a field manager with Inspection Services. I've been with Regulatory Services and Housing Inspection since 2001. I spent a large portion of my career as an area inspector in Northeast Minneapolis, and then subsequently now manage all vacant and boarded buildings throughout the city of Minneapolis. And we've been coming up with some new ideas and new ways to deal with prolonged vacancy and the problems that vacant buildings have and how they impact the neighbors and the people who are exposed to living next to them. And so one of the exciting things that just went through city council, and we actually had a legislative directive specific to the vacant building registration program in the city of Minneapolis. Prior to the legislative directive, there was no time limit for how long a building could remain vacant in the city of Minneapolis. So we have in Northeast Minneapolis, actually, we have the oldest vacant building registered in the program that even predates my starting with the city. That takes us all the way back to 1998. And so to address and to try to stabilize our neighborhoods and to move these properties forward, we developed a new strategy, which is to say that we put a time limit on our vacant buildings. So any vacant buildings that have been registered in the city of Minneapolis for 24, once they hit the 25th month mark, they don't have any active permits. There is no active rehab happening. They're going to go into what we've called our prolonged vacancy enforcement strategy, which is going to lead them down to the vacant building registration fees currently are $7,087 per annual. So that building behind me, the cost of doing business with having these vacant buildings sit idle in our city is we come out, which is what JR will talk to you all about, his involvement with the inspections of that property. But we go out and we monitor the properties. We make sure that they're remaining secure, that we don't have people breaking into them or trespassing in them. And then we deal with all the nuisance activity surrounding and associated with those. And then we also have restoration agreements and things that are in place to work with the property owners to help them get these properties brought back online. And so with the new process, instead of the $7,087 annual vacant building registration fee, once they go into our prolonged vacancy enforcement, they're going to be looking at monthly citations. Those citations start out at a $250 level, and then they double every month up until we get to a $2,000 per month citation that is issued to that property for the code violations that are in existence with that building, and due to the fact that there is no activity happening. So instead of the $7,087 annually for allowing these buildings to sit idle and vacant for a prolonged period of time, they're going to potentially be looking at $24,000 annually for non-movement or not doing any improvements to those structures. And so I think that, and I'm hoping that we have some success with the buildings that have sat in the neighborhoods for far too long with no movement. Obviously, the $7,087 annual vacant building registration fee is not enough of an incentive for some of these property owners to move forward and get these properties brought back online and to get them reoccupied, specifically our residential properties that are having the most impact on our neighbors. And so with the building behind us, we came into play April of this year, right? So that came in through a 311 complaint. JR, who is the vacant building, he works for me. He manages all the vacant buildings in Northeast Minneapolis. And he also manages all the vacant buildings in Southeast Minneapolis, pretty much everything on this side of the river. And then he has a couple of neighborhoods over in North as well. So we try to balance the workload of the vacant buildings throughout. I have 5 staff that do that sporadically throughout the city of Minneapolis. Each one is assigned a specific district to the city. And so as far as the activity and what's occurred with the building behind us, we had got the complaint, came out, looked at it, said, yep, it qualifies for the vacant building registration program. We issued the orders to get that registered into that program. We then subsequently met with the property owners to have conversation with them to see what their strategy was, what their plan was moving forward due to the impact and just the amount of resources that property is draining from the community. Not only reg services resources are being pulled over there, but MPD resources are being pulled over there as well. And obviously with the activity, the graffiti, the continual break-ins and things like that, I think JR has been out there around 50 times dealing with vacant and open orders, trying to keep that building secured. JR and I walked around the building prior to the meeting here. Everybody, I probably saw the dumpsters full of trash and debris that are piled up out in the front of the building. And so we'll be making contact with the dumpster company. Yeah. So yeah, JR actually was doing a site visit yesterday. And when he and I were walking around the building today, he's like, that is new stuff. That just happened, right? So we missed having conversation with the people doing that work, but part of the condemnation process for all buildings in the city of Minneapolis is that they need to go through what's called the building code compliance, or what we call BCC, which leads us to all facets of that building being brought up to current code. So any building that is condemned is required to go through that process. Currently, that building does not have a certificate of occupancy. It cannot be reoccupied until it goes through a building code compliance process. All the permits are obtained, all that work is done. The building inspector, plumbing inspector, mechanical inspector, our housing staff, along with the fire inspectors, will be going through that property to conduct that evaluation to identify all code deficiencies are related to that building, any work that would need to be done through the permitting process to bring that property back up to code, depending on what happens with the new owners and what the intent of the building is. But ultimately, all the main code violations, the fire suppression system and all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems would need to be brought up to current code and meet the standards before that building will be allowed to be reoccupied. So big question for me when I met with the owners was, what happened, right? What transpired historically for you all to get us to where we are today? In talking with them, they had stated that they had all good intentions. They had obviously spent a considerable amount of money to buy the property. They had gotten underway with an extensive rehab. I can't remember what the dollar value amount was, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they had spent to get that property back online, to get it reactivated. In the interim of working with the state of Minnesota and finalizing some things that needed to be completed in order to satisfy how they were going to use that building, it got broken into. It got vandalized. The fire suppression system was activated. That building flooded, had an extensive amount of water damage. And so that kind of perpetuated further degradation. After that happened, it occurred more break-ins, more sabotage, I think to the point where they were actually removing the copper from the building. I know that they destroyed some of the heavy gauged electrical wiring that was on the inside of that building was removed. I'm assuming for the value of whatever that material is for the people who are doing that deconstruction work. So I think what the good news is, if it is good news, the dumpsters that are out there, they're getting that thing ready. They're getting all the debris cleared out of there and removed so they can have access to that building to do that co-compliance inspection that's required. As far as the auction goes, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who potentially is going to step into that. It was mentioned that there's a reserve, whatever that is. I don't know what that dollar value amount is, but that in order for that sale to go through, that minimum reserve is going to need to be met. And so time will tell as to what and who is going to step in to do the work that's needed to get this property brought back online and not have it be the eyesore that it currently is. Yeah, and so the owners, when we met with them, I think they were housed out of New York, right? So they basically, through just the activity that occurred, the amount of money that they lost to try to get that property brought back into compliance, they just felt like it was a never-ending losing battle, and that they were just throwing money after money and not getting to where they needed to be in order to reactivate that property. And so yeah, go ahead. No, it's still privately owned. Yeah. Yeah, and so, yeah, yeah, a lot of people have misconception when we're dealing, and trust me, I deal with a lot of condemnations with what I do. I condemn a lot of buildings, I demolish the majority of the buildings that get demolished in the city as well. But with that being said, once the city condemns a building, the city does not become the controlling owner of that property. The only time that the ownership will change hands is if the private, whoever owns it currently, sells it and gets it off of their asset list and onto someone else's, or if it goes into a tax forfeiture status. If it goes into tax forfeit, Hennepin County then will gain possession of that property ultimately and take possession of it through tax forfeiture. So that's kind of how that process works as far as the ownership transfers and when that happens. But the city of Minneapolis, just because we condemn it, doesn't make us an owner of the property. We have no ownership. We have no control over it. It's still in private hands. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Whoever's registered in Hennepin County for the taxpayer records. I'm not sure what the specific name. I thought it was an
It's an LLC. I don't recall the name of the LLC. Sorry? That doesn't ring a bell.
we can get that information back to the group with
If a person goes to Hennepin County website and searches property info, it'll list the current owner, which is an LLC, but it'll give the full LLC. Yeah.
and their address.
And-
Yep. As far as the arrearments of taxes, I don't know where they currently are with the tax, with where they're at with the taxes. So Hennepin County is actually just finishing up a huge litigation with tax forfeiture. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that or not. But the Hennepin County went through litigation for how they were selling properties that had gone into forfeiture, right? So just to give you a kind of a quick example, right? Yep. So let's say that you had a house and it was worth $200,000 and you owed $20,000 in back taxes and you forfeited the property through a tax forfeiture. Hennepin County comes in, right? And if they sell the house for 200,000, but you only owed them 14, they weren't giving the owner of that property the remainder of those funds. I don't want to get into that because that's not my wheelhouse, but that's kind of what's happened. So it has to meet the criteria established by Hennepin County. So we have to be in arrearment for 2 or more years, right? So with that, the lawsuit has kind of paused Hennepin County's. But I think they're back in action now, right? In talking with the people over at Hennepin County and tax forfeited land, I think they've gotten through their litigation and they're ready to start moving properties back into the forfeiture status. So if this meets the criteria for them to take it back, they would be the ones that would initiate that action. Well, if they don't get what they want, then they're going to retain the asset, right? And so then we got to run through what that looks like. I don't know. I mean, I think that they're probably overboard to get rid of this property and get it off their portfolio and cut the losses that they've already incurred. Because it's in talking with them, I think it was around almost $2 million that they had invested in this thing. And so I kind of felt bad when I was talking to them about what had transpired and what occurred with it, but that doesn't do any of us any good, right? I can feel bad about it, but we still have to move this thing forward and do the right thing. Yeah.
What are the
That it could be, yep. I mean, I can't speak to that because I really don't know. It could be a daycare center. It could be, it would have to be, if they're going to change the use, it would have to meet the zoning. I mean, you guys will know about it, right? Because they're going to have to.
We just
sent, Thomas and the board. We just sent Thomas and the board like a use table of uses. And it's like urban neighborhood too, it's called. It's the whole, like this whole part. I mean, a daycare center, commercial, like if you think about like what uses are around here, not Johnson, but it could be multifamily housing, childcare. It has like, there's a lot of uses. It could be like, it's pretty expansive. So, yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. So yeah, we have no idea to know what's gonna unfold here and what's gonna happen. I don't have a crystal ball that's gonna tell me. I wish I did. Go ahead.
They only come by once a day, about 10:30 at night, they drive down Maze, turn in the cul-de-sac, drive down the back alley, they're gone.
Do you want to talk about your interaction with the security company?
Sure. We don't, to answer your question, we don't get a report from the security company. We don't interact with them. I have been here at the property at the same time, security person was here. And I have had, an unofficial conversation with the security agent from that company. And, I don't know every last detail of the contract that the security company has. I don't have any details, frankly, of the contract that the security company has with the property owner. So they do what they're contracted to do theoretically. We as city agents, city inspectors don't have the ability to step in and tell the owner or the security agency what they should, can, or shouldn't do. We could ask. Yep, we could ask.
So
We could
I
ask
think,
that.
yeah, I think as far as the, the concerns around the security, which is definitely our primary concern as inspectors and what we do. And the biggest part of the process when we're dealing with these vacant buildings is that we want to ensure that they do remain secure and that they aren't open to trespass. And so the system for if you guys are in the area, or if you live next to it or by it, or you drive by it frequently and you see one of those boards removed and it broken into, and it appears to be unsecure, 311 is a great resource. Go ahead. 311. or 911? 311. Okay, that's interesting. That should not be happening because so JR, when those complaints come through 311, if they come in during a period where he, cause this isn't the only building that he's in charge of. We have other issues as well. However, when he's out here, that's what he does. He takes a walk around. We have this right now where if it becomes open to trespass, we go right to authorization, which means that we call the boarding contractor who does that work for the city and say, hey, Pete, come out here. I need you to board up however many openings, give them a description of the location. If you see people actively breaking into that building, 911 should be your first mode of call. And because we need to have the police come out here when we're having the breaking and entering part of it occurring, so they can also have the authority. MPD also has the authority to do what's called an emergency board up. They have the ability to do that through dispatch. Dispatch contacts the boarding contractor. The boarding contractor, per his contract that he has signed with the city, they have 60 minutes from the time that they receive that call from dispatch to be on site with appropriate equipment to secure that building. The big thing and the big reason why I say if you see kids or the activity of people physically breaking into that building, 911, because I want them to go and walk through that building to make sure that it's vacant and void of whoever decided to break into it, to make sure that when we do secure that building, that we're not potentially locking or boarding up someone in that building and not giving them an opportunity to get out. Right. And so you were here yesterday, correct?
I was here yesterday morning at 8:15. 8:15 AM. Yep.
So a few of us went around, every two doors were open. Saw a guy in blue camo. Big backpack, walked right in. Saw a bunch of kids, kids running home.
Yeah, I mean, and I think 911 is the call, right? Eh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that that's really a conversation with MPD, to be honest with you, because if my expectations are, if we have, especially due to the location of this and because it is by a park and because of the size of that building, it's an issue, right? It needs to remain vacant and it needs to remain secure. And when it's breached, we should have the partnership. We can do it, but I can't, he's not armed. You know what I mean? And so I'm not, I don't have the expectation of anyone that works for me because I don't ask them to do anything that I have not done or will not do myself. But when we have these buildings, when they're coming out here and they're finding them open to trespass, he's photographing it, he's calling, but MPD needs to clear that building because when the board up contractor comes out, they don't know if anyone is in there. They'll yell and say, hey, city board up, but the reality of it is every time a building of this nature gets breached, before it's secured, it should have an officer going through to clear that building to ensure that number one, we don't have a body in there or we don't have a victim in there, but we need to make sure that that's happening for the residents that are impacted by that building. What was the response that you received?
She called me back 20 minutes later. Did you call 911? I said, yeah. A woman yelling in the park, asking for help. I said, I'm not going over.
Right.
And the police came, but that was 20 minutes after I called.
Right. Has anyone called 911 with the activity of seeing anyone breaking into this building? Well, yeah.
4 kids going in.
So what's the conversation with 911? Okay.
Thanks for doing that.
Currently, yeah, right now, I have five inspectors citywide. We have 308 vacant registered buildings in the city of Minneapolis. So I'm hoping that with the legislative directive and the changes that are going to be implemented on these vacant buildings, to be honest with you, I got a phone call this week from a property owner that I have not been an inspector for, I think, over 10 years now. I condemned this building back in maybe 2010. I've been in that property 3 times to do evaluations because I want to tear it down. It doesn't meet the criteria for me to do that, right? Condemning a property is one thing. Tearing it down it's the most egregious action and it's the most authority that I have. And it has to meet a set of criteria in order for me to do it, right? Been in it 3 times, got warrants to go in there to do the evaluation, just hoping that it had degraded enough over the years to get me over the threshold to where I could tear it down. Every time it's a disappointment. Doesn't meet the criteria. Got a phone call this week. They're doing the co-compliance because it's condemned and they're going to rehab the property. When my inspector who manages, this is down on the south side, when he called me to tell me that, and then shortly after I had the conversation with the property owner, that it kind of made my day. I was like, wow, maybe you know what? I think the word is getting out there. The people who own these buildings are aware of the ordinance modifications and the seriousness of what it's going to cost them in order to continue on as business as usual. And I think that we're going to see some success with it. I'm hopeful that we're going to see some success with it because these buildings aren't doing anyone any good. I've watched too many buildings over the years in the course of me doing this. I've been doing this for over, I'm going into my 24th year. All of my entire career has been in housing inspections. When they started the problem properties unit many, many years ago, when they started that process, I was asked to be the inspector for it. We were dealing with properties, the worst building owners, the worst rental properties that you've ever, I could tell you stories about things that I've seen over the course of doing this job, but it's one of those things where the more that we engage with you all, the more action and concerns that you can bring to the council members and to the mayor and to the MPD for it to talk about and have some honest conversations about what your experiences are in dealing with some of the issues that come along with these vacant buildings. We need to do better. We need to be better. Go ahead.
We do need to move on, but I wanted to point a couple more questions to you guys. One, do you have to sign off on a sale such as the auction? There's nothing that they request of you. Secondly, is it possible to not use the oriented strand board? For
The OSB is not us. The unpainted plywood that the OSB that you're talking about, that's done through the private owner had that done. So when we, as a city, one of the things that we do, and trust me, I know exactly what you're talking about because OSB delaminates and it deteriorates and it's easy to break into. The plywood, the painted gray boards, that's what we mandate from our contractor.
Oriented strand board that chips off really easy, breaks open really easy.
If you ever see that, that's not the city doing those. That's the owner of the building taking proactive measures to do that. All right.
And I know you got to move on. I'll just from what can you do day to day, week to week? And you had talked about the 311 complication. You can email 311 as well. So I would encourage that. You can send your reports in through email to 311 by going to the City of Minneapolis public facing webpage. And the more detail you can put in, the better. I try to respond either the same business day or the next business day to 311 reports about any property, especially this one. And, you know, the biggest issue, of course, is to keep the property secure. And that one last thing, back to the security company, the private security company, when I did have that, I think it was in June when I talked to the person and I did implore that person, you know, please, issue number one is to make sure the building's secure. And please do what you and your security coworkers who do come by here once or twice a day, whatever your schedule is, please at minimum, go around the building, test all the doors and look at all the windows and determine if they're secure or not. If not, take action. And I gave that same demand to the property owners as well. So in that regard, I did what I could in that moment. Yeah. But so keeping the property secure obviously is job number one. So report it to 311. Just recently, the reason I was here yesterday morning was because there was a report of the window being open, this one south facing right here. And indeed it was. And so our boarding contract, I contacted the boarding contractor. He either came out yesterday or today and reboarded that window. That's right, again, right here on the south side of the building. Sorry. Yeah. Those typically the gray ones are from our boarding. But yeah, he wouldn't have put it over there. Right. It would have been presumably carried out of there by someone else. But so also rubbish, tall grass and weeds, we call those nuisance things. We come out for those reasons as well. In the winter, snow and ice on the public sidewalk, those go to public works. But yes, so please, to the extent that you're willing to be diligent with contacting 311 to report issues, I'll be out here the same business day or the next business day to follow up.
Well, hey, I want to say a big thank you to you too for coming to our meeting tonight. I'll take that. Thank you so much, JR. All right, y'all. Well, yeah, so we've got a pretty serious problem. So let's take a second now. Can we move to the next slide, please? So out here in the lobby, we had an activity when you came in. I don't know if you all had time to participate, but we were hoping that you could kind of give us your perspective on 3 questions. What's the problem that we're facing here with this abandoned nursing home? You know, how is it harming you and your family? How is it harming our community? What's the cost? Then what actions can we take? What things can we do in the short term to make this better? And then finally, like, what's your vision for what this could look like 5 years from now? If you could imagine events and activities at the property, if you could imagine how it was owned and operated, we would love to hear that, right? So really what these 3 things are attempting to do is get us thinking about how we as a community can take action here. And I want to be clear, we're not just thinking about how we would own the building, because we could also rent out the building when someone else owns it, right? We could also think about how we as a community do a cleanup day or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of things we could do. But what we're really trying to do is organize this community. Yeah, go ahead, Thomas. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So let's move forward. We'll come back to this Twin Cities Garden conversation, and then we're going to start talking about the Johnson Boulevard plantings. Next slide, please. So here you can see just a quick history lesson here. Johnson was reconstructed a couple of years ago. Part of the plan was these grassy boulevards were going to be full of plants, native plants. The city was helping the owners of the property with the frontage on Johnson would eventually be responsible for gardening, but the city was going to help kind of set that up. And what we've seen is that the plants have kind of gone wild. Some of them are growing 6 feet tall. It's hard to see across the street, to see if cars are coming, things like that. So that's what we're here tonight. I think we have Public Works to discuss this with us. So why don't you give them a round of applause for coming to our meeting?
Thank you. My name's Don Elwood. I'm the engineering director for Minneapolis Public Works. So my group handles all roads and bridges and bike trails for the entire city. Just rough numbers, 1,100 miles of roadway, 800 miles of alleyways, 300 bridges. We have a very big city here. Johnson Street, when Public Works takes on a project, we get some goals. Oh, I'm sorry. Allison Bell is also with me. So I want to talk about process and technical. And Allison Bell is an engineer working in my division. So when we go out to develop a project, we look at goals. And one of those goals is green. Across the city, I want more trees. I want more greening. So we go through a process. There are hundreds, if thousands of decisions that go into these projects. From a process perspective, I needed to do better on this project, not only from a process perspective, but a technical perspective as well. The plantings we put in look great. They just don't work in this application. So one of the good things is my group learns as we go. Johnson was very early when we started this greening. What we learned on Johnson, we brought to Grand Avenue and Bryant Avenue, 4th downtown, Hennepin downtown, Hennepin South that I'm working on right now. And then you look at what's up on 37th Northeast. We just finished that. So a total different look on the corridor. So I agree with you. That's not the objective that we wanted to achieve. So I look at that from a technical perspective, and the plants that we put in look great along a freeway. They don't work here, but that was the seed mix we put in. Lessons learned. That's what got me here today is I see it, I hear it, I look at where I want it to be. I see 37th, I see Hennepin, I see these other projects. So what are we doing now? And what I mean by now, it's what have we started even this week to start to take action? And I'm about to give it to Allison to walk through what we've done and where we're going. And then when I get back to this process, what do we put back when we're done? And what does that process look like? So maybe Allison, you can walk us through what are we doing now?
Yeah, so right now, you might have noticed we have a contractor out on Johnson. They've been out there for about 3 weeks now. Their first objective is to address the height and then associated safety concerns. So they're mowing down the tall, whether it's natives or weeds that have sprouted up over there. Their next step will be to prepare the area for a bigger restoration that we want to come back and do in the spring. And what we want to do between that before that restoration is talk to you all and understand and ascertain what you want to see out there. And we right now have about 4 options. We're not going to do this right now, but this will be what we want to eventually be able to talk to you about. Options like, do you want us to just put in turf grass and go back to, kind of the more traditional boulevard? Are you interested in maybe a more manageable, mowable, what we call a bee lawn, where it grows really short, but it still gives pollinator benefits. It's still native and gives you that sustainability benefit. Do you want to just leave it blank? And are you interested in planting your own garden? So that's the type of information we're hoping to gather from you, so that when we come back in the spring with the contractor, they have a plan for each and every boulevard that matches what makes sense, both for what you want to see aesthetically, but also what you're willing to and want to manage yourselves.
So just quick summary, so we had a process and a technical issue. Where we're at right now is we're coming out to address that. Where we're going is we want to hear from you one-on-one. What would you like to see in that boulevard in front of your home? That's the quick summary and where we're going. And I didn't bring any slides with me. And I guess if there are questions, we can try to address those.
Thinking of process.
Y-
We got 6 months, 8 months to do that. So what do you think?
Yeah, so my first step was, sorry? Oh, so, I was asked how we envision that process of getting feedback from you all and coming up with a plan. So, somewhat ironically, our first step was to come to one of these meetings. So here we are, slightly ahead of our schedule, but that's okay. So that was going to be one step in the process, and hear from the group what they wanted to hear. I was also planning to send out letters where you could respond individually. And our contractor also has in their contract to do door knocking or leave behind mailers and information to give you a few avenues to respond back. And then my job will be to collect the individual responses, follow up on anyone that we might not hear from, and make sure that everybody's been heard. Well, yes, I mean, because this wasn't quite the agenda item, right? So I'd rather it be the agenda item be, let's talk in here specifically. Yep. Yes. So the question was, have we thought of Clover? So I encourage you to go check out 37th Avenue that was just reconstructed. What they did on that project was, when we restored the boulevard, instead of traditional sod or the seed mix that we used on Johnson Street, we used what the University of Minnesota has cultivated. It's called a bee lawn, and it's primarily clover and fescue and a few other very low grow, easy to manage native plants that are also pollinator friendly. See, isn't it beautiful? Yeah. Yeah. It really looks great on 37th. It's really doing what we want to see. Sure.
So that, yeah.
It's like the neighbors had no choice. Why not?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think that city signed up.
Let me try to summarize that question. So at the beginning, yeah, we sold it as something. It was maintenance free. That was a process question and a technical question. We're learning as we go. I needed to do better. So those are lessons learned. Okay, as you move ahead, so let's get this corrected and work with the residents on what they want to see. Some are literally maintenance free. Other people are more proactive. They want more and something looking better in their boulevard space. And we have tools in place to do that too. Grand Avenue is slightly different where there's on the classification of stormwater benefit and things like that. That's a process I'm working through at the city to say, what type of funding is available when we have something that's non-standard, or what's the new standard? Again, this is new at the city, and we are still learning, and our goals are in the right place. I want it greener. I want it looking nicer, more trees. And that's what I'm trying to do, even on downtown projects where you wouldn't think I could put a tree, and we've figured out how to do it. So as long as those goals are aligned, I think we're on the right path. Not everything goes perfect. Not everything goes great, but I step back and look at Johnson, and I go, that's a great project because we made a lot of difference. I've been at the city a long time. I know what that looked like before. And I see those corridor changes. I like what I see. In the back, Molly.
First of all, I appreciate that you guys had a vision to not just have one street. I live on Johnson Street on the non-bike lane side. Can you speak a little bit about the height choices for the plants and the plants on the bike lane side? I just want to know, like, what was the plan to have short plants and make them tall, or what was did you get a variance for the height?
Molly, good question. What was the vision? We got plants that are 6 feet tall. You're on the non-bike side. We put the wrong plants in. There are certain areas where 6 foot tall works great. This is probably not it. I need sight lines, not only for people who are on the bike trail. They need sight lines. The vehicles need to see the bikes need to see the vehicles. Cross traffic, it's hard to look through 6 feet of grass. Then I'm also working with our reg services partner to say you can't have 6 foot high grass in the boulevard. So I'm working through those issues. The goal is to get something that looks great, but not 6 feet. And so we'll get there. And I think 37th is a great example of that, of you can have low ground cover, minimal to low maintenance that looks beautiful, and you're getting the pollinators to come in. And when we can hit that sweet spot on all our projects, that's a good thing. 37th Northeast between Central and Stinson, roughly.
Exactly.
Another question on Zoom land, and so we'll let Amanda.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to know, it sounds like, if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm one of the people that lives on Johnson. I live on the bike path side, so when we're pulling out, the sight lines have been a little bit difficult, but we've been managing it. I'm a native plant enthusiast, so we've been able to do the weeding and such. But the 3 options that were provided, does each homeowner get to pick the one that they want, or are we going to be voting on it and going one way as an entire boulevard community? How does that look?
The trees, and no one in their right mind would put in a rain garden. And I think these homeowners need to know, this is not like that. This is and these are it's a. So you need to cut them some slack.
Thanks for that comment. The comment was, those rain gardens are not maintenance free. Nothing is maintenance free. And I'm going to pass it to Allison to talk a little bit about some of those technical things. Just in my perspective, the level of effort it takes should get easier in year 3 and 4 on these rain gardens. But Allison, maybe you can fill in the blanks for me.
Yep. So I'd say 2 things. One, you hear a lot of, when people are talking about sustainability and native plants, we usually say that it's less maintenance because typically they don't need as much water. Typically, they don't need to be mowed as often as your turf grass. So that's less of a strain on our overall system. So that's kind of one caveat I'll say that is true for natives. So that is still true. In terms of maintenance free, of course, not the case. And when we come back to talk about these options, in addition to aesthetics and what you want to see and greening your boulevard, it will be what maintenance are you comfortable with and willing and able to do. So some of the options include the bee lawn, for example, is you only mow it, and sometimes you don't even have to mow it because it doesn't grow tall enough that it anything nefarious will happen with that. So that's a really important point that we'll be collecting, is understanding that level of maintenance. Because some people, I know we have gardeners in here, want an additional space with natives where they can take care of them. And an option for that would be we would have a mulched bed. That's a lot easier to maintain because the mulch will help with the weeds. But
All right, can you hear me this time? All right, sounds good. Thank you. I just wanted some clarification. It sounded like I live on Johnson. I'm one of the people who has a boulevard garden. I think I'm one of the few people who can recognize the weeds from the wildflowers. So I've been doing a lot of the weeding. However, of course, as was stated, we did plant too tall of plants. Specifically, the goldenrod it's just kind of out of control. It's really aggressive. It's really tall, but the bees do love it. Now, you had said it sounds like there's 4 options. I heard 3 listed. Does each homeowner get to pick which option they want to go with, or is it something that we'll be voting on as a community of boulevard homeowners, and then everybody gets the same planting, I guess?
yeah, great question. It's simple answer. Everybody would be able to pick their own way that we would restore your boulevard. So.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yes, and the contractor is very interested in and aware of that issue. So they are the contractors, Metro Blooms, if anyone, they're very community based contractor. So they're very aware of that, and they have. I don't understand as much about plants as they do, but they absolutely have a plan in place to take care of that. So yes. There's a concern about some of the invasive and kind of really hardy weeds. And so we're making sure that the contractor is aware, and they are making sure to tackle that as part of the restoration process. I did help the contractor one day doing weeding, and I was covered in some thistles, so I'm aware.
Did you guys work together with Columbia Heights when you did 37?
Yes.
Well, the question, did Minneapolis and Columbia Heights work together? The answer is yes. And both process and technical. So it was a cooperative agreement with Columbia Heights. And I'm very pleased with the outcome. Certainly it changes that whole look of that corridor.
So yeah, we would expect to get, sorry, I'm going to get used to this by the end of this meeting. The question is, will the contractor spend any additional time during the establishment period or making sure the invasive weeds are handled? So that will be a separate contract. So we don't quite yet have the details for that contract. I can say that the plan will be that for the restoration and preparation for planting, that the beds would be completely clear of invasives and ready for only the good things to come up. And then, we won't obviously do a seed mix that requires 3 to 4 really years of intensive maintenance. We would pick something that would be kind of ready to go a lot quicker, something like the Belon. That's pretty easy to manage. But those nuts and bolts will be figured out when we get and that's feedback we want to hear when we talk about options. Yeah.
So quick summary, we talked about how we got here, that process, where we're at today. We're starting to go make some changes out there. Looking ahead, Allison will be working with you one-on-one or however we got to figure out house by house, block by block, what the intent is and give some options for low maintenance, higher maintenance, more involvement. And I think, that's the right thing to do because I want this city to be greener across the board. And this is one of the steps and what it takes to do that. So I really want to thank you for letting us come out here, give you an explanation of what we're doing. And we'd love to come back later, maybe next spring and talk more. I'll repeat the statement, but there was not a question mark at the end. The statement was the park board mowed theirs immediately. So now you have the statement that was made. We'll work with the park board. We all have different methodologies, park board, Minneapolis City. Again, I go back to the goal. How do I achieve that goal? What's that objective? So that's what I need to do.
Someone asked this question at the very beginning. I did something said public works. People remember that? So
Do you want me to read it? Okay. Correct. Yep. Will the rain garden?
A portion of Grand Avenue will be maintained by the city. Some of it is, again, it's working with property owners on that location. So as the city learns how to do this and how to roll it out and how to implement it, we're not going to be perfect, but we're getting there. We're getting better with each project. And I think that's the good news. I look at 37th. There's a couple other examples out there. They are awesome. So we're on the right track. So that's the good news.
Sure. So it looks like reference to Hennepin County Sustainable Landscaping Guidelines for Successful Plantings. Does the city have any document similar to this guide, Johnson Street and other sustainable landscaping boulevards? So the first thing I'll say is you might notice that we call it sustainable landscaping because we actually, decided to be consistent with the county. So a lot of the times we refer to their guide because it's perfectly catered to Minneapolis, as we are obviously in Hennepin County. So we don't have a specific Minneapolis focused sustainable landscaping guide as of right now. As was mentioned, we have our street design guide that does have a section on greening throughout the streets. And so I would look for that to be continued to be updated as we learn these lessons and progress this process and greening our streets.
That's all the time that we have for our committee and any others.
Well, just for both groups, I'd like to know, for both you guys, what do you need from us, our Windom Park Community Action Committee? So we'll have you back. I'd like to have you back about every 20 minutes.
Well,
what do you need from us?
what do we need from residents? I think from the public works perspective on Johnson, I really enjoy seeing this. You're active, you're participating, and you're coming up with ideas. The more people that come up with ideas, it makes my job easier and it makes the objective easier. So if you have an idea, bring it out there. When Allison comes around, talk. I mean, talk to have you ever thought about this? What about that? That interaction with our residents in the city is critical. So I want to hear those things because I can't achieve the goal if I don't know what you want. And so that's my ask of you. Tell us what you want.
Yep. Yeah.
So I know this project came over to Reg Services through 311 complaints, asking our team to go out and to issue orders to cut this stuff down. And so I know that we had some miscommunication at the city level. Appreciate what was said. With the development of any new process or project, you learn things. good, bad, what works well, what doesn't work. And so for him to stand up here and say that, hey, we're learning, we're getting better. I believe that to be true with anything city related. I agree with what he said about we need the engagement of you all. No one knows your neighborhood better than you. No one knows the activities and the daily ongoings of what's going on, what the needs are of the community more than the people who are living in it and impacted and affected by the implementation of projects that we get involved with. And so I think that, you know, moving forward, a lot of the complaints that we get specific to the height issue and the boulevard specifically is that, you know, is it an impediment for our drivers, our pedestrians, our people who are walking their children? Is it leading to a more hazardous or a dangerous situation for our kids? And so I think that everybody's on the right track with, we know that we can't have things 6 feet high on the boulevards for those reasons, but I think that we're moving in the right direction and we're trying to sustain a more beautiful city and how we can diversify that. And that includes not only grasses, but our buildings as well. And so together, we're committed to making this work as best as we can, even though we have some limitations, but we really do rely on everyone. And I appreciate the involvement from the community, you all showing up to these meetings, because it does make a difference. It does matter. And we need to hear it from you all.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
I'll take it. Thank you.
All right. So we are officially 15 minutes over our supposed end time. If anyone would like to leave, feel free. I think we also want to continue the conversation about the nursing home. And so just a couple dates here for those of you who are looking forward to the next meeting. Our next board meeting is Wednesday, October 2nd. We are looking for new board members. If you're excited about the issues you just heard about, join the board. Oh, excellent. Okay, give his name to Doug. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we just recently changed. Hey, one more thing I want to say. We just recently changed all of our dates to Wednesdays. We used to be a Tuesday thing. Now we're a Wednesday thing. So in your head, I want you to just shift it by one day, okay? Every other month. Board meetings are every month.
Every other month on the third Wednesday.
Okay. Hey, but just to be clear, you can join the board anytime. You don't need to wait till July. So yeah, those are the dates. Let's get back into the nursing home. If you're still here, I assume you're really interested in the nursing home.
I got one topic that.
Oh, sure.
I'm a youth baseball coach and t-ball coach and soccer coach, and we play at Windom Park, and the field is like 80% dirt, and it's like this fine particulate matter that, like, I think the amount of dust that the kids are inhaling is maybe negating the benefits of the exercise. So I know part of it is that we have the hockey rinks in the winter, which, like, you know, hockey rinks, and then they're used all summer. So I'm thinking, like, you know, one option would be maybe we rotate where the hockey rinks are, maybe like the soccer fields themselves rotate. I would love to see a little turf put out there, and it doesn't need to be a golf course, but like, I think it actually is, like, it's really bad this year. Like, it's embarrassing that, like, you see the kids running and it's just, you can't even see them. It's a cloud of dust.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're specifically talking about the grass, right?
Yeah, the
not
grass.
baseball diamond.
Baseball diamond's okay. Yeah, but the grass at the soccer fields is,
Yeah.
it's really bad. So, and I think you know, my kids go to Pillsbury, we're in the community. I think like next year we might not be doing Windom soccer because of it. So
Yeah, let me make a few comments on that. As far as the conditions of those fields, last winter was a really strange winter for those fields. We had almost no snow cover. It was oftentimes not cold enough to freeze the rinks. And so I think they were kind of muddy and people were using the park nonetheless, and it was kind of drumming it up. So that might be why. I think in terms of climate change, we probably have to think about hockey going forward, but it's definitely a problem. The turf is in pretty bad shape.
yeah, that
The problem with grass seed is that the fields are so heavily used that I don't know that there's an opportunity for it to germinate.
yeah, and I think that, you know, the expectation that it's gonna be a golf course is one, like, I know that's outside the realm of possibility, but I think that a little bit of like this, that we had so much rain this spring, grass seed actually grew in my yard for once. Like something could have been, we could put a little effort into it, that it's not a community embarrassment. Yeah. Yeah, and I also think like, you know, maybe kind of like what they're doing with the U of M with the clover, like, is there, you know, maybe it isn't, you know, Kentucky bluegrass that we're trying to grow out there, but just like something that isn't dirt and dust.
Definitely. And
Yeah. Yeah, we'll grow hay.
so let's talk about, thank you for that comment, Jeff. And also if you want to do some guerrilla gardening, we can back you up on that. So let's talk about the nursing home. We have an activity outside. Some of you probably already participated in it, but before we go out there and get back into it, I'd love to kind of just get your all thoughts about what do you think we should do? A couple options. We can do nothing. Let it sell. What happens, happens. Another option, we can try to take it over. That sounds like a lot of work. I know we can do it if we put our heads together. We can also have a kind of a plan where once someone else buys it, we can try to make it as good as possible with pressure, right? And that's pretty much free. So I'd love to hear any thoughts in the room or on Zoom about what you all think we should do about the nursing home. The question is the school overpopulated with kids? So, expand the school is your idea.
But she's in the hallway. I think generally we're not.
Well, Larry and Jane, just not to call you out, but you answered my survey, and you said that you have carpenter skills, which to me sounds like you answered the survey and you said you have carpenter skills. That sounds like you want to get your hands dirty on this project. Tell me about that.
I think you're setting me up here. I don't mind doing the work if we have an organized thing to do it. I guess the question is, I don't even know the extent of what you're thinking. Are you talking about taking it over and actually as a community redoing this thing? You know, the one thought I had when we were talking about this whole thing is this thing probably wouldn't be where it sat today if we had security. I mean, they robbed everything out of the building. They destroyed it. The people were trying to get this thing going. But if we don't address that, I don't care what you're going to do. It's not going to work. That's my 2 cents.
Should do like they do on the state highways. Adopt the building.
So the idea was adopt a building, and also the security idea, I think, is right. Like whatever we do. Okay. Definitely. Any other ideas in the room? Okay, sure. So I see 2 vehicles, maybe 3 vehicles for, oh, sorry. The question was, can you tell us more about possible ways to take it over? I see 3 vehicles to take it over. There are probably 4, 5, or 6 that I'm not thinking of, right? Number one, WPCIA, the organization that puts on this meeting, is a nonprofit organization, 501c3. We are also the official NRP money organization for this neighborhood in Minneapolis. NRP stands for Neighborhood Revitalization Program. Back in the 90s, with kind of like urban decay and suburban expansion, the city put a lot of money on the table to try to keep this neighborhood and others like it vibrant and a place where people wanted to live. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank related to that line item. As a 501c3, we might not have to pay property taxes if we were to buy this thing. And finally, if people were to make donations to our organization, and then we use that money to acquire the building, those would be tax deductible, right? So those are some of the financial vehicles that we could use. We've got a couple strings we can pull as WPCIA. We can also seek grants. We can do all those things. There's an organization, this is idea number 2. There's an organization inside Northeast here called Northeast Investment Cooperative. They own a couple famous buildings, namely the one where Fair State and Aki's Bread House are housed. Okay, so that was a dilapidated property. They bought it and rehabbed it. They're a cooperative. And so they sell shares to members, like $1,000, $500, $200, something like that. And that is how they raise capital to go and do these projects. And they try to give a return on those shares. Might not be, you know, the best return you ever heard of, 3% or something. But the idea is that they're cooperatively developing the neighborhood and they're targeting dilapidated properties. I talked to them about this. They said, this is the perfect project for us. It completely aligns with our goals, but we lack the capacity to activate by, you know, next Tuesday or something like that, right? What that could look like is we could do a big push for the neighborhood to buy shares in the cooperative, which would raise the capital and give us the control to do something like that. Okay, idea number 3 is that we could start a separate corporation or partner with other developers where neighbors just pool their money and do something about it, right? So those are my 3 ideas. Idea number 4 is do nothing. Let someone else take it over. And then we can use all those same, you know, kind of civic energy and stuff to say, hey, we want a cafe in here. We're going to put $50,000 of development stimulus on the table for some cafe owner to come in and start a cafe. Now they're going to be renting it from who knows who, some landlord from Pennsylvania. We don't know. But like we could still have a dope, sorry to use millennial language. We could still have a really nice cafe in our park. If we did something like that, right? So I just want to really encourage you all to like, we can think short term, like we could make a bid, $25,000. Hey, can we get the building for $25K? We don't know what the reserve is, right? But
you need to make sure, put the city on the hot seat to make sure that this sale is legitimate, that they're meeting all the requirements for a sale.
Yeah.
That they've met their tax liabilities, so forth.
Yep.
That is simple.
The comment was, we can also watch like hawks when the sale goes through to make sure it's legit. I think we can pretty much stop it from going forward. That's illegally. We would sue them or something. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, or the comment was, there are other examples where neighborhoods can essentially prevent certain types of development. So a good example locally is at St. Thomas, they're trying to build a big stadium, and the neighborhood, there's kind of half of them oppose it, and the other half are Tommies who love it. But can the neighborhood stop some sort of development? In this case, we cannot stop a sale just with like civic energy. We could probably stop a sale because they didn't meet some sort of legal requirement. But we're not going to be able to essentially stop them from buying this building and doing what they will with it. In terms of if they were to seek a variance, we could probably stop them from getting a variance, right? However, the new 2040 zoning is very liberal. And when I say liberal, I mean you can do a lot of things with it. So So I think this building, Liam and Elliot mentioned just a little bit about it. You could have like two different commercial properties. So think like a cafe and a bookstore. You could have an art gallery up to 5,000 square feet. Those are allowed in the U2 urban 2 neighborhood. And so this neighborhood, which is kind of like the second lowest zoning in the city, still allows those types of mixed use buildings. And a 5,000 square foot artist studio is just like one example of that. Childcare center, medical facility, all of these things are allowed in the new zoning. Yeah, right. Where's that other mic? Can we get that? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So there's I think a very real chance that they might just tear it down, which was what the comment was. So we heard about the state of the building, right? It has a brick exterior, but it was heavily flooded. That flooding sat for a long time. Might be in terrible condition.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Putting in the heating and they put in the air conditioning. And I thought, well, something's going on. And then all of a sudden,
Right.
the building got tagged.
Right.
So it was crazy.
So in terms of tearing it down, this is what they have to benefit from. It currently occupies 8 like single family lots. The building itself occupies 5 single family lots, and the parking lot on the other side occupies 3 single family lots. So if you think about what a house is worth in this neighborhood, if you think about what a triplex is worth in this neighborhood, they could build 8 triplexes, right? They could also build something else. They could build a multifamily building that's, 4 stories tall or something like that. So they could also keep the building and do whatever they want with the parking lot. So there's a lot of options there. I think it's a really good question. To summarize, they could tear it down, and there might be a lot of upside to tearing it down. Let's give you a mic first.
Hold that thought.
Back in 73, when we bought our house up on Hayes, the nursing home, which was called Bethany Covenant Home, was trying to buy up the whole block. They owned our house and about 4 more on this Hayes Street and 3 or 4 on Garfield. They bought a couple more houses, but then the house prices started to go up and they couldn't afford it. So I said, you want to sell the house? And they says, yeah, we'll talk about it. 2 weeks later, they said, yeah, we'll sell it to you. We're not buying any more houses. But they were going to expand it up to the 3rd house from the end. Those were all going to be parking lot. This building was going to go all the way up to there at that point.
Sure.
In time. And I've been here 53 years. I don't want anybody else taking over my block. I don't want anybody else taking over my block. I've been here 53 years.
Any other big ideas, bold ideas, calls to action? Anyone have a thought on what we should do? Can we get a mic back here?
What would be the next steps in trying to work with the cooperative as far as?
So I
meeting
think
with
in
any
order
of
to
them?
work with the cooperative, the first thing is that the auction would have to fail because they say they don't have time for it this go around. If they had 2 months, maybe they could do it. The next steps would be starting a partnership. And that is what they said they wanted to do nonetheless. They said, this is a great idea. Let's do it next time. And so that we might get a second bite at the apple with this property.
If this auction fails, how soon can they have another one? Do you know?
I think that the auction site, I mean, they could probably have an auction the next day, but if this auction fails, the auction site has something like monthly or maybe every 2 months dates that they do things. So it might look like a month or 2 months later would be the next time. Now, I think given why the auction failed, like maybe the reserve wasn't met, or maybe the inspection didn't pass or whatever, the owners would probably have to take that into consideration. And I think there's another option that we could directly approach the owners and try to acquire the property from them. A donation is, Jaron wants me to say, they could donate the property to us for a huge tax write-off. But that we don't know the owners. We haven't talked to them. So it's hard to get that done. Question right here. Can we get you a mic?
Work, do they write in like an amount and submit it, or is it something where there's like an auctioneer?
Yeah, so this is a digital auction open to, I assume, a global marketplace. You can go to the website. The way it works is you register as a bidder, and it's pretty much eBay. You put in your bid, and someone could bid up on you the next minute. It's a 2-day auction, starts on the 23rd, ends on the 25th. And if the reserve isn't met, that auction would fail. We don't know what the reserve is. So, right. So the property has been evaluated a couple different times through this process. The city currently values it for taxation purposes at 2.5 million or so. Back in 2020, someone did an assessment at $7.5 million. And given the liabilities that come with this building, I think it would be considerably less than that. I saw an example last night of a high school in Pennsylvania that had been abandoned for 10 years, 27,000 square feet. This one's 35,000 square feet. And they bought it for $100,000. And so, you know, it's a big building. A lot of work had to go into it. They ended up spending 3.3 million on rehab. So the overall cost was $3.4 million for that high school. This one would probably be along those same lines.
One thing I want to mention that I heard from the regulatory services is that the code of compliance, right? The thing that they need to complete doesn't necessarily stop an auction from happening. It happens all the time that it's not complete and the auction will go through anyway. And then it's up to the buyer then to accept those terms of like, and so even though it's not Minneapolis's policy that we would allow these buildings to be sold, it does happen.
Right.
So
Andy has a comment behind you, Molly.
Just gonna, I'm sorry, I was just gonna ask, what do the, we have any sense of the cost of, has anybody said this is what it needs, or that's just the surprise of the buyer?
I think you can expect that it needs a total overhaul, right? It's flooded. It probably has a good roof.
the
Other
toilets
than
are
that,
ripped
it's
out.
flooded, it's been vandalized, it's been stripped. Probably mold issues. So probably millions of dollars.
Brought up. So if they gave it to you, you'd still be on the hook for millions of dollars.
Yeah, you're responsible then for the code of compliance. Yes.
Yeah.
Before it becomes uncondemned. So, and those things would be disclosed to the buyer, but the auction could happen. Correct.
All right. So one last call to action from me. If you're still really interested in getting involved, look at the newsletter. There's a QR code and link at the bottom of the article about the nursing home. Fill it out just like Larry did. Tell us what skills you have. Larry said carpentry. And we can start to work in a smaller group. We're about to get kicked out of this building, so we got to go. But yeah, please join the neighbors who are focused on this, and we can make something happen.
And if you didn't get a newsletter in the mail, they're out here.
Yeah, there's
on the table.
newsletters out there. Thanks for coming, everybody.